The 2019 American biographical film Harriet, directed by Cussie Lemons, tells the story of Harriet Tubman. Tubman was a black woman born into slavery in Maryland around 1822, in a world where her body, her labour and her future were claimed by others as property. In 1849, fearing that she would be sold further south and separated from her family, she escaped. She made her way to Philadelphia into freedom. What is most astonishing about her story is that she simply didn't save herself and walk away. Again and again at great risk, she returned into slaveholding territory to lead others out through what was called the Underground Railroad. This was not a train line, but a hidden network of paths, houses, signals and people who helped enslaved African Americans escape towards freedom. Tubman's courage was not that of someone whose dignity had first been recognised by the world around her. It was the courage, instead, of a woman who acted before permission was granted. She moved through a system designed to keep her quiet. Having escaped, she did not disappear into safety. She returned for others again and again, while the world around her still hunted her. The woman bleeding for 12 years would have understood this. She has no name in the story, no public advocate, no household gathers around her need. She comes from behind and reaches for the fringe of a cloak. Before any turning, the crowd understands. Before her faith is named, she has already acted. Her touch and action is the radical centre of the story. The movement around her is full of urgency. A synagogue leader has fallen to his knees in public because his daughter is dead, and everything is moving. Disciples, the crowd, the whole press of bodies carrying their grief towards a house where a child lies and a family waits. The woman hemorrhaging for 12 years does not wait for that urgency to pass, because for those 12 years her body has been bleeding. She doesn't wait for the disciples to notice her or for the crowd to make space. She barges through. 12 years is a lifetime, long enough for pain to define one's life entirely. And that crowd knew what prolonged bleeding meant. Her body would have been surrounded by suspicion. Her touch would have been treated as unclean and as dangerous. Her presence would have carried the possibility of accusation. Her body was a public problem, yet her suffering was carried in private. And she says to herself that if she only touches the fringe of the cloak, she will be made well. No one gives her that belief. No one authorises her confidence. She forms it. She comes to this view in the space where others have abandoned her. And then she acts. She becomes, one can say, her own preacher, her own advocate, her own witness. As I said, her touch is the most radical moment in the story. Before any word is spoken aloud, she has already broken the system that kept her on the edges. She reaches through the public world with the body she was taught to hide. She doesn't wait for permission. In acting, she disrupts everything. For what had been hidden is now visible. What had been treated as contamination leaks into public life. The recognition of her daring touch doesn't grant her agency, it is acknowledgement of it. Her bravery is not created by being noticed, it is already present. And she is then healed, restored, not just in body, but to the public world, without shame. A private healing would not have been enough. If she had slipped away unnoticed, the crowd would have continued as before, the powerful at the front, the woman and other women behind. Instead, what she has claimed in her body is made visible for all. Her touch is no longer defilement. Her touch has become a reaching for life, even when everything around her said, no, don't touch. From that moment on, she is made well. The bleeding stops. 12 years of suspicion around her body, restrictions and shame at her presence are brought to an abrupt end. Not only does her bleeding end, it is also the end of the story that had been told about her body. Her body is returned to her, and with that the possibility of life in community. This is why the naming matters so much. Daughter. That word alone places her where she had been refused a place, inside kinship, honour, the circle of community. She's not only cured, she is restored. But the story takes an even more interesting turn and causes us to ask even tougher questions, because the crowd continues on towards the dead girl, remembered in many accounts of this story as being 12 years old. And that age matters. Think about it. The older woman has been bleeding for 12 years, for as long as that young woman has been alive. And that young woman dies probably just as her own bleeding was about to begin. She dies at the threshold of marriage, fertility and family honour, because in that society she could be married off when she turns 13. The older woman has lived as good as dead, and yet her body is now alive with hope. And hence we can see that this passage holds these two women together in a terrible symmetry. A young woman dies while full of life. An older woman lives as though already dead. Their healings are also in stark contrast. The older woman reaches through a crowd in public and takes what she needs. The young woman lies still behind closed doors, and a hand reaches down to take hers. One healing is loud and disruptive, forced into the open. The other is private, tender, and gentle. And yet both bodies are restored. Both are returned to life. It would be easy for us, especially white privileged men like myself, to focus on the grief of the father over the death of the young girl, the young woman. But a much bolder claim is made if we step back and think about the place of women's bodies in that culture and in our times as well. Because in the double restoration of the young woman and the older woman, both of whose bodies are claimed by others, there is a claim here being made to us about the worth of bodies, of women's bodies. It is a claim that these bodies, these lives are worthy of life. They have dignity, they have agency, they belong. Not because of what their society has decided, or not because of the bleeding or the silence or what their death seemed to say. And this claim about women's bodies and women's lives and their dignity and inherent worthiness, their agency, is not a claim that only needs to be heard and was heard in the first century. Harriet Tubman heard it in her day, in the midst of a slavery in America. And it challenges every arrangement in our time. Whenever a young woman stands at the threshold and her body is being reduced to a marriage, a way to bring the family honour, to fertility, before often, in many cases, when she has even had a say in the matter. It challenges every situation in which a woman has been bleeding for years, carrying in suffering in private her suffering, because public life finds it inconvenient. It challenges every place where women's bodies are monitored or doubted or managed or shamed, where their pain is muted because the community has grown accustomed to it. At the 8 o'clock service, it was wonderful to have Dr. Angela Evans with us this morning. Dr. Angela Evans normally worships at the cathedral and is a world-leading expert on clubfoot and is dedicated to her life to bringing relief to clubfoot and has revolutionised the treatment of it. And she said to me after the service, in Bangladesh, where she's done a lot of her work, if a girl is born with clubfoot, She will be innumerate, illiterate because she won't be able to go to school. She'll be socially outcast, shunned, and very likely never married. So it's not just bleeding, it is anything in which women's bodies are treated in that sort of way. That's why this story is unsettling. It is unsettling for church. It is too easy simply to mourn a young woman without thinking about the way we continue to arrange the lives of people who are living without their consent. It is too easy to admire the courage of a suffering woman and yet leaving untouched the systems that produced her suffering. Of these two women whose story touches us deeply, it is the bleeding woman, I believe, who haunts us the most. Her bravery in pushing through a crowd that had no place for her, her taking of what she was told she could never have, her placing of her hidden wound in the public life. And in some ways we could imagine she is still asking us questions, still refusing to let us avoid the questions that her courage demands. Questions like, which women have we pushed to the edges and then celebrated for their endurance? Which bodies have we prayed over while declining to ask who put them there? Which wounds have we preferred to keep private because going public would require us to face and name the systems, the people and the theology, yes, even the theology that produced those very wounds? These are the questions the church has yet to answer satisfactorily and must continue to seek to answer. Perhaps we can put it this way when we think about our community here at St. Theodore's. When a woman this brazen carries her bleeding body into the centre of public life and forces us to look, what sort of community do we wish to be? Who do we wish to be? Bystanders, hoping she will move on before things become uncomfortable? Keepers of good order that is now threatened by her actions? Or will we dare to be a community that sees her, welcomes her, names her bravery as faith? Will we go further than that and seek to answer the question she urges us to address? What can we do to shape a society and a church, a community in which no woman is left captive to what others decide her body is worth? A society in which the dignity of women and women's bodies is never again up for debate. Amen.